welcome back in to another episode of Offensively Accurate with your host, AtlasThugged, deep voice Maxer, and new title, Controversial Virtuoso. I actually got that from an oof test or whatever those things were called. People were pointing out their genius versus retard metrics on a few different standards. I did one on morality, and that's one I got. Thought it was pretty funny. But we're gonna have a good show today. I have a few things in store for us. Actually, three main topics. I couldn't fit everything in the title, but you probably saw the title. Brett Cooper is getting bounced out of the Daily Wire. Now, this kind of stems from the Steven Crowder Big Con attack when he exposed a lot of what Jeremy Boring had said on the phone call. This is about a little over a year old now. I saw the writing on the wall with the Steven Crowder thing regarding getting the new talent in. Essentially, Jeremy Boring argues the fact that they can do whatever they want with their young talent because they're giving them a platform and giving them a fan base. But there's a bit more to it than that, and we'll get into it. The second big thing is also that, how do I best say this? Actually, James Lindsay has a crusade, and it's being backed up with an echo chamber with the likes of people from the Babylon Bee, like Joel Berry, Seth Dillon, and now there's other ones coming in from like Trigonometry with Constantine Conan. I'm probably forgetting a good amount of them. There's a big group of them, and they gatekeep what is allowed to be in the Christian hemisphere of conservative politics. And it kind of follows this funny trope of, James Lindsay in particular being an atheist, telling Christians what they can and can't believe and what you can and can't put in politics from a Christian perspective. So there's a few odd things there too. The easy go-to would be to look at Seth Dillon and say, hey, just stop, you're Jewish. But we're going to go to a bit higher IQ than that. Seth Dillon is honestly kind of really lost a lot of my respect. I mean, I had it to begin with just because I wasn't so keen in on how these things operated. The post-war consensus and everything that comes along with that too. But we're going to keep it to a bit more of a standard and more traditional kind of showcasing of what's going on. And the last big thing is, nice to see you. Thank you. Yeah, good evening to you too. Another big thing is the fact that the allegations against Pete Hegseth regarding the sexual assault are false. And again, this will be my opinion for now, but I'm sure things will come to light. I actually read the entire full police report. And I broke it down into a few different measures as well. I mean, I broke it down quite a bit. But if you were to read the full police report, what you'll take from it is that Pete Hegseth was in fact the one who was extremely intoxicated. And the lady who was assaulted by him was entirely coherent, backed up, and corroborated by a few others who were there, including another attendee at that conference and an employee. But we'll go ahead and break everything down. We'll go ahead and get started with the fact that Brett Cooper is out at the Daily Wire. So starting with this, the plans to replace Brett Cooper on her own show will be the fact that she'll be getting replaced by her own producer. Now, I'll go ahead and put this on screen here. Let me go ahead and switch to this, and this will be my X account. But this is from AF Post, right? America First Post. And this is that the Daily Wire allegedly plans to replace show host Brett Cooper on her own show with producer Reagan Rohrbach, who was also pictured in the thumbnail, if you saw that, after a disagreement with CEO Jeremy Boring. Now, we actually have a really good video breakdown from Ian Carroll, who I will say, once again, is my favorite individual to go to regarding matters that happen, pretty much anything all political. He's one of the top go-tos regarding like the Israel-Gaza conflict, Israel-Palestine conflict, rather, as well as just a bunch of other things too, right? He's pointed in YouTube, a lot of YouTube unfriendly ideas, right? This is a guy who barely can keep his TikTok account from being suspended. So we'll go ahead and bring him on here, and I'll read the caption before we get into this. This video is about almost 10 minutes long, but it's a really good breakdown. And I'll kind of comment in between because, again, I was here when Steven Crowder had these same issues when they proposed a contract to him over a year ago. Now, he pointed out that the fact that the contract is specifically aimed to keep them within the bounds of what is okay for YouTube. Highlighting a bunch of facts that if they were to be suspended or struck, over a long enough period of time for, utilizing the First Amendment right, they'll suffer consequences to their fee, right, which would be the contract amount that they would be given. And obviously, Steven Crowder turned down the contract, and that started his initial anti-big con movement. And it actually created some distance between him and the rest in the field. If you remember, him and Candace Owens went at each other there for a little bit. And obviously, this is when Candace Owens is pretty highly tied to the Daily Wire. She's not anymore. She's had her own falling out with the Daily Wire. So we'll go ahead and take a look at this. And so this is from, again, Ian Carroll. He says, the Daily Wire scandal is coming in hot. Word is they're forcing Brett Cooper out in the most evil way imaginable and replacing her with her best friend. Now, this I really can't corroborate. This is just from Ian's word, but I guess this is, other people have said the same thing. So not only is it the producer of her show who has been there and helping the show, but also a really close friend. Obviously a stab in the back, you could imagine. What the specific disagreement is, I'm entirely unsure, although it has been highlighted that it was something that got pretty fiery pretty quickly. So I'm really unsure. And now Britt Cooper has been getting, she gets poked fun a lot because she looks like Ben Shapiro. But she's honestly been a very, very good and charismatic kind of commentator, especially for the movement, especially for Daily Wire, but definitely for conservatism as well. And I believe she's around like 4.5 million subscribers now. So her being on the Daily Wire platform actually did help her quite a bit. But we're going to go ahead and get right into this here because Ian Carroll breaks it down with a lot of evidence, right? A lot of receipts, as he usually does. And once again, he does a great job kind of breaking these things down. And if any issues on sound, whether it's on my end, it'll definitely be on my end. But just let me know if there's any issues. Can't hear anything like that. We'll go ahead and take a listen here.
Dude, I think the Daily Wire might be about to collapse. My buddy James just got a scoop from an inside source that Brett Cooper is getting pushed out of the Daily Wire, and there's this whole crazy contract thing. And I just got word from a source at the Daily Wire that Brett is not the only big name that is on the way out at Daily Wire. We're going to cover the Snow White movie, Pendragon, a lot about Jeremy Boring, the self-proclaimed God King of the Daily Wire. But I think the place to start is with this super controversial video from Steven Crowder from a year ago where he turned down a $50 million contract from the Daily Wire. Bloomberg reported that Crowder complained that they weren't going to pay him enough, but that is not what Crowder was claiming.
Because it's not about the money. It's kind of unreal to me that the only thing these people can still talk about is the money. The conversation was about conservatism, the movement, and big tech. They keep talking about money. I'm talking about a country. I'm talking about a movement. I'm talking about making a difference. It's not about the money, and Jeremy and the Daily Wire know that.
So to sum it up, he was explaining how the contracts had clauses in them that the Daily Wire creators would get penalized severely if they were flagged by YouTube for content that didn't go with community guidelines, thereby tying all of their content to big tech censorship.
And I don't actually think, I watched this before, I'm not sure if he actually shows it on screen, but there were 3 major sections in this contract. One of them I remember specifically was the fact if they were to get a strike, and I believe it was like if they were to be suspended from YouTube longer than 90 days, that would cost them 25% of their entire contract. Other ones would be if they would be demonetized for a period long enough that they couldn't recoup what the contract would want to make in terms of ad revenue, would also knock them out too. And so with these fees were kind of all set up in a way that obviously now you have to play ball with YouTube. Now, from a business model, this makes sense. But from a model of being the literal leading kind of group for conservatism in that era, even a year ago, I mean, it's a little bit more than a year ago now at this point, when big tech social media oligarchs and these big, the overlords on social media have such a chokehold on what's going on in terms of what's allowed, whether it's, anything free speech, anything related to COVID, anything related to the election, and a few other smaller niche things there. Why is then the largest conservative publication also ensuring that these guidelines are followed? And, especially when you're supposed to be like the big arc kind of breaking in, and trying to find new ways to actually kind of get the free speech out there on issues that are relevant to everyday people, that were rather important and significant. It just didn't make a lot of sense, and they kind of painted it in the frame of Steven Crowder just wanted money. We'll keep going.
And so if you were a content creator at the Daily Wire and you signed this contract, you'd have to censor yourself to go along with YouTube. You would be beholden to all of big tech's censorship regime, which is inherently destructive to the truth. And so Crowder turned him down because he rightly identified that we need to make a model that is immune to big tech censorship. And then he played this clip of audio from Jeremy Boring's phone call.
They don't get deals that...
They can be wage slaves for a little bit, come over and make a salary and grow their brand. They can be wage slaves for a little bit. They can be wage slaves for a little bit.
If you can't tell, that's Jeremy Boring saying that his new talent can come in and be wage slaves for a little bit while they build their brand and they, earn their place. And it looks like Brett Cooper signed that exact kind of contract. And she has built her brand and earned her place with 4.5 million subscribers, loyal fans. But then when I talked to my source, it got real dark. Have you guys noticed that this producer Reagan girl has been doing fill-in shows for Brett every week lately? Well, if you're not familiar here, Reagan is like Brett's best friend. Apparently she was her maid of honor at Brett's wedding recently. And I'm not sure why Brett wanted out and started to be unhappy there and why this whole thing started. My source wasn't really sure either. But once she crossed Jeremy Boring and Jeremy was pissed, he decided he would replace her with her best friend.
And obviously these fill-ins being a warm-up period, right? Kind of warming up the audience, getting her to be more ready to take that position on, especially going from a producer to the actual commentator herself who's on screen. And he shows a clip here in just a second where you're going to see just how similar she sounds to Brett Cooper, kind of copying the cadence and everything.
And so he made a contract offer that Reagan apparently could not refuse, and he is now replacing Brett with Reagan slowly until the expiration of the current contract with Brett in December. Brett is in an NDA and she's not allowed to say anything about any of this at all. And it sounds like this is kind of widely known at the company at this point. So she is being forced to continue her show as though nothing is going on while they replace her with her best friend and probably are going to manufacture some sort of like slander or like, I don't know, I'm just speculating, but they're probably going to manufacture some sort of logical reason why Brett pushed herself out and they had to fill in with Reagan.
They're going to do the whole like crisis king thing again. They're going to say that she was saying it around the office and it was too harsh and she was very anti-Semitic. No, I highly doubt that, but it would be kind of wild to think what kind of slander piece they will give against her, knowing that her NDA is in place and that she kind of really can't defend herself outside of saying like no comment. There's a few things she can say here and there and obviously defend herself and say I didn't say those things. But she can't point to the actual reason why. She can only really kind of play defense on that.
Apparently, they even gave Reagan acting classes for her to emulate Brett's every movement and word. And when you watch a Reagan episode, it's kind of like, what? This is like very Brett.
Dude. Welcome back to the comment section. I'm producer Reagan filling in for Brett today. And this week, the media has rightfully been very focused on the murder trial of Laken Riley.
Turns out the likeness is not just because they're best friends. So you might be asking, and no, Snow White, not happening. That's canceled. But Jeremy is apparently intent on breaking into movies, and the Pendragon cycle is apparently like his pet project that he is devoted to. And when you dig into why that is, you start to realize what is wrong at the Daily Wire. And the answer seems to be Jeremy Boring himself. This Bloomberg article goes into Jeremy Boring's history, how he moved to Los Angeles from a small town in Texas in 2000, trying to make it in the movie industry. He even started a little production company with the dude from Avatar, but it flopped and everything failed, and eventually it, dissolved. And apparently for this Bloomberg article, they said that they had enough money to develop scripts for their 2 series here, but they weren't sure where the funds to actually shoot was going to come from.
I did catch that. You see that Atlas Shrugged was one of the scripts alongside Pendragon. Obviously, for my namesake, I would have liked to have seen what their take would have been on their depiction of what Atlas Shrugged would have looked like, given that was one of the few things that kind of introduced me into the political realm as well. But that's just a side point.
Because they need a lot of money for this, and they are pouring everything into it, apparently. Producing full-on Hollywood-level movies and series is a whole different beast than producing podcasts, and they are way overextending themselves. We'll get to this Razor commercial in a second because it's crazy to watch. But like everything points to Jeremy. But like when Candace was fired, everything pointed to Jeremy's personality. When you actually look at like, this is an article written by Jeremy. Self-proclaimed Daily Wire God King and co-host Jeremy Boring talks about getting out and doing something. This is a whole article about how wise he is and how much success he's had and how he has all these stories and what he would tell you to do to be successful. I have a speech that I give to typically young people who move to Hollywood because they want to make it in the movies. From the guy who moved to Hollywood and didn't make it in the movies. What I have observed, I have friends who star in these big superhero movies. I have friends who started businesses. I have friends who. It all amounts to what I have discovered is that the difference between those who do and those who don't do is that those who do and those who don't do. Wow. That is such sage wisdom, bro.
On the point of like him being a failed, actor, I was going to say comedian. It makes you think too, the same thing applies for all kind of sides across the aisle of politics. Why are there so many failed like theater kids in politics? And maybe that kind of speaks to the fact that politics has become extremely performative. Instead of being real and substantive, it's actually more adopted and adapted to the current social media model, which is that those who can kind of put on the best performance tend to get the most attention. Now, not to say that that's like bad by any means, but just to make the point that it probably makes it easier for these failed theater kids to take the reins at higher up positions and have a lot more influence than you would expect from your average layman.
I have a different theory. I think there's two types of people in media in the world. Those who are dicks and those who are nice. And people who are dicks are all in it for themselves and their own aspirations and money. And people who are nice to work with. And people who are all in it for themselves can get pretty far in this world. But eventually, usually they build a house of cards that burns itself down.
You can buy my new razor instead.
Because when Candace left, Boring says he was personally offended by her behavior and that she'd done damage to both the Daily Wire and her personal brand. Actually, newsflash, bro, you did damage to your own brand and Candace blew up because Candace stayed with her integrity and her exactly who she is. Because people want integrity. They want truth. They don't want a platform where had she said the things that Ye said, that would not be permissible on my platform. It's the era of free speech, bro. Not permissible on my platform is like, bye, we don't need your platform. Because we all know what you're not allowed to criticize on your platform.
And obviously he's pointing to the JQ, which is the Jewish question, which is Israel, which is Zionism. But the one thing I will say is when Steven did this, Elon hadn't bought X yet. So in that point of time, we really were kind of in a position of, where you go to Rumble and you sacrifice a lot of money and, you know, the actual large kind of network that YouTube is, in an attempt to be able to continually say what you want. Now for the bigger account, it's like, yeah, you might as well. You can imagine a large, good portion of your audience will follow you over there. Now, when it comes to like the smaller talent and the younger people, you're not going to be able to translate nearly as well. Especially when Rumble has a less capable kind of algorithm, and also a less size of a network, it's just not plausible to expect that you would be able to grow in any significant means compared to what you would be able to do on YouTube. But since Elon Musk has bought X, every other social media corporation, company, what you want to say, platform, has had to kind of pull back a little bit and also compete on that level, which is, well, if you're not going to let me do this here, I will just grow on X and I'll dump my whole audience there too. Which now helps in the fact that people feel less inclined to actually want to follow the YouTube rules and will push the boundary. And then once they get bopped or struck or suspended, whatever terminology the platform uses, they'll go to X or Rumble otherwise. And Rumble's grown, in the last year or so, and which has been a good thing. Now, I don't think that they compare to YouTube at large, but they do outcompete them on certain things. I think Dr. Disrespect, who recently joined Rumble, showed that Rumble beat YouTube on certain things like latency. So for streamers, Rumble actually performs a bit better, but that could also be because the entire network and server load capacity is much less strained than having the millions that are on YouTube. But again, all of these things kind of point to the Daily Wire repeating the same kind of issues, or rather carrying the same kind of burdens and problems that they had with Candace Owens, maybe in a different specific context, but carrying it out the same exact way.
Bro. So the Daily Wire is in serious financial trouble while trying to overextend themselves, allegedly. And they're doing some layoffs, and Jeremy Boring just showed up in a brand new Cybertruck recently, apparently. He's so close to making it in the big leagues, and he just can taste it, and he cannot give that up with his series like Pendragon, for example. And it sounds like now that things are crumbling around him, he is getting desperate and fighting dirty and just like lashing out at his top talent, people like Brett. And my source told me that Brett is not the only top talent that is thinking about leaving, and that there might be some announcements coming in the coming months. And to any of the other top talent out there, like Walsh, Knowles, if you guys want to leave, we will support you. Like, we got you, bro. Brett, we got you. Wherever you go next, we're with you. Because I just need you to look at this commercial for the razors that Jeremy made like last year, and look at it knowing what we know now about Jeremy Boring and the Daily Wire in general, because it's hilarious. Just check this out. God King. This dude gets his hair and makeup done every day when he gets to the office, but he doesn't have a show. He just gets makeup done to be the God King at the Daily Wire every day. So, and when this commercial came out, everyone thought it was satire, but like there is an undertone that is not satire here. This is.
I mean, it's like when you make the same kind of joke, but it's not self-deprecating. It's one that makes you like look better, or like in this case, like you call yourself the God King. And every time you make an appearance, you call yourself that. You have it in commercials that says it verbatim. You write it in your own articles as well. There comes a certain point where it's like, it becomes at least questionable at a specific point in time. But again, I've never found it funny. He always makes the joke of, he's like lowercase g, of course. And once you kind of reach these certain levels, the people who do find themselves at these high levels in companies, CEOs and such, there does require a specific kind of narcissistic energy to actually maintain and be confident in the decisions that you make, and having confidence that you're doing the right thing at all times. Otherwise, people can sniff out that you're either a weak leader or that you don't trust yourself. So they kind of go hand in hand, but they're also mutually exclusive. It's not required to be so.
Who he really is.
That's before some peon who works for me went and said that boys are boys and girls are girls. And that was just too much for Harry's. They condemned our views held by millions of Americans and virtually every human who's walked the planet until about 15 minutes ago, as inexcusable. And they dropped their ads from our network because of what they called values misalignment. You're damn right our values are misaligned. And it's not just Harry's either. Gillette razors used to be the best a man could get.
I'm serious. Go rewatch that commercial and realize that this dude actually refers to himself as the God King. That is not just satire. And imagine working for that dude. So keep your eye on Brett's show. Pray for her. She's under contract until December, allegedly. And I don't know what comes next. She's not allowed to talk about it. But we'll see how they play this out, because it sounds pretty dark. Oh, and we all know how much the Daily Wire loves to litigate. So I just want to clarify that this is all rumors and hearsay. Just thoughts in the ether, just my opinions, who knows? Not trying to make any claims or accuse anyone of any crimes, just a dude on TikTok. So we'll just keep our eyes open and see what happens next. Dude, I think
they are like that though. They probably will try to litigate against him. No, I doubt it. But if he continues on that path, they'll certainly at least respond to him on X. This post now has like 2 million views on X. And I can go ahead and highlight it here. Let me actually switch back over. You can see it here. 2 million views, 19,000 likes, a lot of bookmarks here. People are covering it as well. And he highlights the fact that somebody else was actually covering this too. I'd imagine it's probably someone who's at least close to the two, Brett and the producer. Forget her name already. And, again, people pointing out like the Israeli Wire, Myron Gaines, as well as many others. Um, but again, Brett Cooper is pretty talented. I think that's one of the things you can kind of point out with this. I would expect her to follow suit with Candace Owens and just continue and redesign a new show. I believe her show currently is called like the comment sections with Brett Cooper. Obviously, I don't think she's going to have rights to the show if they kind of break contract like this. I don't think. Well, that was also another portion of it too, actually, in the contract, is that you actually don't own the rights to that stuff. So if you were to leave, you'd have to rename the show and start from scratch again, which is why Candace Owens' like new podcast is all like titled like completely different from what it was when she was on the Daily Wire, and I can't remember what it was called. So that is part of the unfortunate aspect, is if she does separate, she'll have to actually once again regrow her entire subscriber base. Candace Owens points out that like she has an old account on YouTube that kind of just sits there now, that had millions of subscribers. So she ran a pretty hard campaign to get all those people to come back and follow her, which they did, and it was a good thing too, because people were obviously pretty involved with the Candace Owens one, especially because it did fall on the JQ. And in regards to that, that's also going to blend in with what we see from James Lindsay here in this next topic before we kind of move on, with who's kind of really gatekeeping what's allowed and how far Christianity can actually have a presence in politics and otherwise, namely in like in law. You know, and how Sutado makes a really good point. Is anyone under 55 still watching the Daily Wire? I think that they probably do have a solid I would imagine that they definitely do better than cable. You know, when they see these things like CNN, MSNBC, all the different kind of streaming networks, their average age, Fox News even, kind of resides around like the low 70s, high 60s. I think Fox is actually the best out of that group, in like the high 60s. And I would imagine Daily Wire is at least going to be a good 10 years under that. I have a lot of good friends that actually watch the Daily Wire who aren't nearly as tuned into politics, although they are Christian and they're very conservative. They kind of enjoy things that are from Matt Walsh, like, which is like the What is a Woman and Am I Racist? And so they've at least done a good amount to kind of bury themselves in the culture, and the culture war, more so. And so I would imagine that they have at least a solid base of people. Now, for the terminally online and those who are a lot more tuned in with, like, you know, Christian nationalism and the movement that it's currently been on, they are probably not watching the Daily Wire. In fact, they might be just like hate watching it, or they're at least tuned in enough that they know what's going on and can respond to it in kind when they do make moves like this. So yeah, I just echo the sentiment there with Ian Carroll. You know, pray for Brett Cooper. That's rather unfortunate. It's kind of a really bad way to go out. I mean, to have your friend replace it, I mean, that doesn't really feel like she's much of a friend there. But again, maybe they talked about it. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe Brett really has no issue with it, what's going on there, and her taking it over, especially if she knows she's going to bounce out of there. She wasn't going to be able to keep that platform anyways. So it's curious what they'll actually kind of change that to. It'd be the comment sections with, and whatever that girl's name is. It's like, starts with an R, like Rhonda or something. He doesn't have it here, and I can't remember what it is. Let me actually go back to it so I can get the name. Her name is Regan Rohrbach. So that'll just probably change the name and who's going to be attached to it. To say I'm surprised, though, is like, no, I'm not surprised by any means. You fall out of line with the Daily Wire in any kind of regard, you do get bounced. Which does bring me to one of the last points I'll make on this. When it has regards to Matt Walsh, who is somebody who I enjoy quite a bit, it makes me think, though, too, there comes a certain point where you're involved at a high level, Matt, that when you've seen this thing happen with Candace Owens, you've seen what's happened now with Brett Cooper, you were there when the big con issue with Steven Crowder was a thing. It kind of begs the question, you know, how much of serving money does Matt Walsh do over serving what he believes to be his own principles and principles that other people should have? And, you know, and I kind of point to one of the arguments, because Matt Walsh quoted me like about a year ago at this point as well, when I was actually going at him for the fact that he was giving the kind of mundane, not very helpful, just get married advice. And even, you know, I've spoken to my father about this too, and a few others. He kind of has this elitism to him where he's like, he'll give you the kind of like, that's my, you know, boomer answer, and be very detached from the actual problems that occur. And in regards to especially being such a figure in the political space now, you would think that you would then try to turn your audience in on things such as what's happening with like the Jeff Younger case. And obviously, the Jeff Younger stories is one that's absolutely terrible. But as well as like things like family courts and such. Michael Knowles, I have a less strong opinion of, well, rather a less favorable opinion of, especially when he got involved with the Nala situation here recently, and in terms of like Protestantism and orthodoxy. Forgive me, my gosh. But to move on from that, though, that's kind of where the story's at right now. I've not seen any updates either, but the last I checked was like 4 p.m. today, so maybe there has been something that's changed since then. To move on to maybe more the substantive, I can't talk today, the more substance regarding James Lindsay in his crusade against the woke right, as he would have it, is rather this. And so I'll go to the one tweet that actually kind of highlights this in a positive light, although I don't think it's positive at all. So not to bury the headline here, James Lindsay actually published a paper for the American Reformer, and it was a trickery. It was a hoax. It was a fake. He got a hoax paper published, as what this guy says here in his tweet. And what he ended up publishing was indeed, he took a bit of the Communist Manifesto, a portion of what we know as, the worst thing ever, especially with how bad communism's been kind of infiltrating our society. Although there's different flavors of that now too. And I'm having some issues connecting to YouTube right now. So if anybody's struggling to reach me, hopefully this isn't them giving me a final strike. That would be rather unfortunate. But if I disconnect, I'll try to restart, maybe with like a different title. But again, just to point out what's going on with James Lindsay and attacking the woke right, goes along with the fact that there are gatekeepers who are doing as much as they possibly can to kind of ensure that Christian nationalism doesn't take a foothold in politics, and keeping it kind of locked behind that it is just a bunch of anonymous accounts. But again, the lead here is that a American Reformer, which is a publication I've literally never heard of in my entire life, which is apparently a Christian and is pro-Christian nationalism, from probably a more mainstream brand, he published an article with the pseudonym Marcus Carlson, and it's been up for 2 weeks, but he just took on earlier today to kind of make it a bit more public and highlight it and laugh at these people in their face, that he actually took portions of the Communist Manifesto, changed out some of the language in them, and then published it on the American Reformer's website as like an own, to attack at the idea that what the Christian right is doing is actually no different than what the left has been doing, and under guys like that. And so he'll explain things a bit better in a video we're about to watch too. And once again, it looks like I'm struggling pretty bad with frame rate as well. I'm not really sure what's going on with that, so I apologize. Hopefully I can connect again here in a second and do a lot better. Not sure what would be causing me to break out like this, actually. So let me go ahead and make sure I start shutting some of this down. But I can go ahead and read this here. And one of the things here is he slightly adjusted the Communist Manifesto to be about Christian nationalism. It's been up for 2 weeks under Marcus Carlson, and he replaced a bunch of these different terms here. But Jeff Younger had a response to this too, which I thought was pretty on point, and I had a couple of responses to some of the tweets I saw as well, which is this guy's kind of cheering it on because he's also anti the woke right, if you can call it that. And Jeff Younger says this is a really bad take. In any logical system, reversing the means of terms in the same logical structure will give a coherent but opposite conclusion. For example, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. All non-men are immortal. Socrates is not a man, therefore Socrates is immortal. And then he goes on to say further, the valid logical forms of argument are the same for everyone, Marxists and non-Marxists. These logical forms don't represent the same method of thinking. It's the same way of thinking for all rational persons. And so they had a bit of a back and forth. My main point with this, and actually kind of just change it here because I don't know what's going on with my computer right now. So I apologize that this episode might be pretty rough. My main point with this, which I've been getting a bunch of likes nonstop since I've posted it, because it was pretty aggressive, is that James Lindsay's one of the worst political actors, or worst actors in the political ecosystem. Him and many others like the Ashley St. Clairs. So many conservative women actually adopt this as well. But James Lindsay, Seth Dillon from the Babylon Bee, Joel Berry from the Babylon Bee, Constantine Conan, and there's a lot of others too. They've breached the conservative movement by proxy of, being left behind by insane leftists. And the continual destruction and subversion of the Christian right is happening now from even other actors that are ones that are even lesser known. And, it's coming from more so than just the Daily Wire. It's coming from Daily Wire adjacents and all those that are there. And I'm going to actually, real quick, just check my software here. Because it looks like I'm bugging out really badly. Or at least it's telling me that. I'm not sure if it's actually, that's what's happening right now. Okay, just wanted to be sure. But anyways, I'll go ahead and put one of these responses I had to someone up here too, because I think this is where we're at. Let me put it on screen here. So this is Seth Dillon, who is applauding the fact that James Lindsay lied to a Christian publication, and with no intention of actually honoring and writing an article under the guise that they would be hoping that he would be writing it for. And Seth Dillon was like, look, James was able to trick these guys into publishing the Communist Manifesto. And they argue because the woke right is the same thing as the woke left. They use the same rhetoric, the same methods, the same grievance and identity framework. And it's kind of wild because, you sit here and think, and it's like, yeah, I definitely see, I see Christian nationalists dressing up in all black, bashing in windows of different places. They're upholding the current thing all the time, rather than having some kind of actual strong ideological backing. Their solutions differ, but their wokeness is identical. It's, again, my main takeaway from seeing Seth Dillon applaud, as well as Constantine Conan chiming in, and all of the same kind of usual suspects, was the fact that at least they're being honest. At least you and the rest of the liberals who masquerade as conservatives are being openly honest about your tactics of subversion. Instead of baiting these ideas, you champion James Lindsay, who blocks to the slightest hint of dissent. Now, they did join in on this Constantine Conan little video, and we will go ahead and take a listen to it as well. Now, Aaron McIntyre, or Oren McIntyre, I think is probably the more correct way to say this, is a strong figure that is a proponent of Christian nationalism. He's an author who also wrote The Total State, I believe is the book. He doesn't have it actually right there in his bio, but he's pretty solid, although he does work for the Blaze, and I wouldn't say he goes far enough on a lot of aspects. But he writes, if liberalism is the answer and the marketplace of ideas is the key, wouldn't have been more productive to discuss the issue as someone who disagrees rather than creating a self-congratulatory echo chamber. Now he's saying that obviously because this man here, Constantine Conan, obviously agrees with liberalism. He's someone who was formerly left, who's now moved over to the right wing. And there is this plague of, by proxy of the fact that the left went so insane, progressives went so bonkers, so ridiculous all at once, that you had, just by that fact, so many kind of middle-of-the-road liberals, moderates, libertarians even, who were like, well, I can't go along with that, so I guess I'm right-wing now. And what that's done is that's propelled, these kind of moderate liberals into the conservative spheres, being the fact that, again, like we were saying earlier, politics has become a lot more performative than it is substantial. And with these things, you now have all of these actors now acting as if they're going to control and dictate what is good for the right wing when they literally just got here and let alone don't even exhibit any ounce of faith to Christianity. They don't act like they are the version and technicality of Christless conservatism. And they uphold these things by wanting to move back to, again, I say this all the time, like 2012 liberal ideas. It's really classical liberalism. It's what these people are hanging on to. And because of how radical and fast moving the politics has went in these last, 8 years, maybe even a little bit beyond that, we've now developed and pushed the Overton window to where the right really truly doesn't exist outside of being online in spaces like X or Rumble and the like. And so they've rather kind of blinded themselves and drank the Kool-Aid into thinking that they are the new right, and hence they're going to gatekeep what comes back into the right wing. And it's rather unfortunate. So we'll take a listen here. And again, if there's any issues with sound, let me know. I can tell I'm dropping frames really badly. I have no idea why that is. I wish I had a good idea what was going on, but I unfortunately do not. We'll go ahead and take a listen here. Hopefully in the replay with this, everything will be a lot better and would have uploaded normally. So I apologize for everyone who's listening right now. Looks like I got hit pretty roughly with something not too long ago. I'm not sure why the internet's being strained so bad.
And James, you mentioned the term woke right. It's a term you and I have both used, but it'd be interesting to talk about it for a number of reasons. But first of all, what do you mean by that term? Because a lot of people are very confused about it.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the best term. It's more accurate to I don't use the word woke too I use it a little too casually still, generally speaking, but I've tried to be very specific when it comes to it, to use the phrase woke Marxism, as in that it's a species of Marxist thought, yada yada yada. So we can very easily place that on the Marxist left, right? Well, woke right, another term that might work for that is woke fascism. And just like woke Marxism is technically woke neo-Marxism, this could be called woke neo-fascism. The more syllables.
Why is it woke?
Well, that's what I wanted to get to. So there are kind of two ways to look at why it's woke. And one is kind of philosophical and one is practical. The practical side is look at how they behave. They behave exactly like the woke. There's the targeted influence campaigns. There's the manufacturing of what the postmodernists called legitimation by parology or whatever. They create the illusion that there's massive support for this and massive distaste for that, using social media manipulations like we just talked about. They are highly invested in identity politics. The answer for them to leftist identity politics is a reaction identity politics or reactionary identity politics, equal and opposite, or in biblical terms, answering evil with evil, which the Bible says not to do, by the way.
And so this is where we're already going to start to disagree on these things. And it's wild because, again, he barely quantifies any of what he says. A lot of this, like to repeat what Dave Smith said when Dave Smith went off on him not too long ago, is it's a lot of very empty intellectualism. It bears no fruit, to use a nice saying there. Fighting evil with evil. And so he quantifies wanting in Christian nationalism being a movement more of politics rather than it is a religious movement. Obviously it's religious, but it's less religious. It's not evangelical. It's in the form of rather returning to the roots in which this country was founded upon, and promoting ideas such as nationalism, promoting ideas such as not the separation of church and state, and getting back to where we were when the country was founded. Now, he describes all of these things, all of these wants, as if they're rather revolutionary, more so than they are reformed. And that is where a lot of the disagreement comes from. James Lindsay, again, being one of the worst people in the space when it comes to these kinds of ideas.
Very specifically. And so there's this, grievance, identity, everything's bad for white Christian men, straight white Christian men. We're the oppressed minority under this. There's an ideology, and this kind of bleeds into the philosophical idea, but we'll get more specific with that in a second. There's this kind of belief that there's this ruling class that's erected an ideology to marginalize people like them that sounds very much like woke, except instead of saying that it's like the white people the white ruling class created white supremacy to marginalize people of color, especially black and indigenous, and their ways of knowing from getting inside. The woke right or the woke fascist side says instead that following World War II, on the back of Hitler and the idea of never again, there was erected a post-war liberal consensus. Starting in the 1940s, immediately, starting in 1945, the creation of the United Nations was part of this. The signing on to the United Nations was part of this. They assigned Bill Buckley, to having done a route to drive the true conservatives to the margins so that a false post-war liberal consensus conservative movement could rise up, the neocons, and hold them out. So the neocons become this kind of hegemonic force within the conservative faction. edges out so-called true conservatism and these more dangerous, so to speak, ideas like fascist ideas, like Carl Schmitt's ideas about unbound executives and friend-enemy politics and so on, that these ideas all had to be pushed to the side on the pretext that World War II or a Adolf Hitler can never rise again. And so therefore, the true conservatives who represented conservative politics and kept at bay the beast of the left, which they say is that the right's true function is to keep at bay the left. In other words, to have a war, right versus left, with everybody in the middle, I guess, taking fire in the crossfire. But they believe that this post-war liberal consensus and the neoconservative movement literally was designed to marginalize their perspectives and to keep these other more radical right-wing ideas out of play. So this is a very woke way of thinking about the world, that there was a structural construction of the social and political and cultural environment designed to exclude people like them in order to be able to achieve certain political agendas. And now they believe that they've woken up to these ideas. Woke. They've found them again. They've read the forbidden philosophers, Carl Schmitt, Julius Evola, James Burnham, and so on.
And so really what we're seeing is not only just a failure of to be able to actually even truly define what conservatism is, but more so kind of give everything by proxy, right? Everything that he is trying to kind of articulate is all by proxy. And so arguing that, the right wing is now like woke, as in like these are like newfound ideas we've come across, or that we've discovered something that we should have been doing this entire time, is a rather poor way of describing the fact that as you loosen the barriers on First Amendment speech, as you loosen the barriers on just all kinds of platforms of what's acceptable as an idea, and you pair that with the population witnessing large, aggressive amounts of degeneracy, decay, elitism, corporatocracy, that people don't begin to actually question the roots of what is liberalism, and what's actually taken its place, in which what he is a proponent of. He is a proponent of liberalism, which most conservatives argue is the exact reason why we got here in the first place. We got here because liberalism failed the United States. The current idea, the structure, the way all of it has played out has actually given pathways to replace Christianity as the religion of what this nation is, because it's not a matter of religion or not religion, it's a matter of which religion. And you can see these kind of things pointed out with viral posts of the fact that rainbow flags and the like BLM flags have taken the place at the Capitol over the American flag and over other symbols such as the Bible and things of the like. And it's rather unfortunate, because you would think that this would be a discussion and debate that could be had, or an argument rather, on these large platforms. But instead it's someone who is putting forward an argument that the individual across the table already agrees with. And so again, they're just kind of platforming it to give it a lot more credence, rather than say James Lindsay go on a debate with Sargon of Akkad or Carl Benjamin, who justly opposes all of these ideals he's going to give. I will say, because I'm not sure why the connection is so bad, that I will probably try to just finish this stream off once we finish with this James Lindsay section. So I apologize. I cannot figure out what's causing the huge lag here. So I apologize once again.
Read these things, and they're bringing back a true conservatism that was excluded from politics roughly since the end of World War II on the bogus pretense of preventing the rise of another fascist like Hitler or Franco or Pinochet. And so there's a very practical explanation for why they're woke, but especially their behavior. Lots of lying, lots of character attacks, lots of saying no enemies to the right, but they don't actually even attack the left that's their enemy, so to speak, at all. They only attack other conservatives. Lots of power plays, lots of manipulative, speech. And then there's the philosophical, deeper aspect. Why woke? What does woke mean? Woke up to a structural politics that marginalizes people like me. And we need to band together in solidarity, no enemies to the right, in order to be able to create a powerful enough oppressed coalition to flip over the power structure by putting ourselves at the center and claiming power for ourselves. This is explicitly woke, having a critical.
And so again, acting as if, and one, having to push Christian nationalism. And again, he's not even really saying it. He's trying to give it this term of the woke right to kind of bash it over and over again. So people who are maybe unfamiliar with these ideas come across of it, and they know that James Lindsay's this guy who talks really, really well against things like communism. And so he kind of uses this authoritative position to then use poor language to articulate what he has a reason to be upset with what he sees in Christian nationalism. And again, James Lindsay is a self-stated atheist. He's someone who doesn't believe in Christianity. Now arguing why Christianity shouldn't be upheld in the form or in structure of Christian nationalism, rather pointing it to having roots in fascism and being what we should all oppose. And again, this comes from the viewpoint and lens that liberalism is the reigning doctrine and is what should be the place of American politics, and obviously not progressivism, but not Christian nationalism either. And again, painting it in such a light to go to lengths again to be subversive. I mean, going to a publication, which we talked about earlier, and abusing a publication that no one's ever heard of, but now they have, just by the fact of, I mean, you're going to be hearing about it here in the coming days when a lot more Christians begin to be aware of what James Lindsay did. It's a subversive tactic. Actually, I would argue what James Lindsay did is a communist tactic, right? It is getting behind enemy lines and using it to subvert them from the inside by pretending that you are a friend, rather when you're an enemy, and then trying to denigrate them from the inside. And another point here to be made too is this kind of push that you'll get that it's not a good thing for Christians to wield power. And again, it's nonsensical because if you were, as a Christian, and you wanted to run for politics, let's just take a very easy example here. If you're a Christian and say, hey, I want to run in my local election, or hey, I want to run here, you would be not a Christian if you were to legislate things not based on the fact that you looked to things such as biblical structure and God as a way to help adjudicate and the way you would want to dictate and vote on legislation, whether it was to pass for or against. And when you look at these things combined, it kind of speaks to this idea of like the boogeyman that's being created against Christian nationalism, right? It's again, pointing at things such as like, oh, they're going to take away, they're going to make women wear clothes again. It's like they're going to make public pools a modest place again. It's like, and for someone who is as Christian as I am, none of these things like scare me by any means or regard. They kind of point the fact of, and James Lindsay specifically not, at least that I've seen, but you'll see people who oppose putting the Bible back in schools, and the Department of Education actually being given a structure that has Christianity inside of it too. All of these things that I view as obviously good things from a Christian's perspective is all pushed against because, forgive me, they are upheld by these lies that are, the separation of church and state, this kind of culmination that we see with the post-war consensus, and the kind of idea that, again, forgive me, that nationalism is bad and should always be chastised. We kind of get to these positions where Trump and Elon Musk and others in that group, Vivek Ramaswamy is another one, who looks at it and goes, well, yeah, illegal immigration is bad, but we want legal immigration. And you look at the way our country is kind of just like breaking at a lot of different points, right? Welfare systems are being just broken. Social Security cannot keep up with the current amount of population we have. They're all disincentives, right? And it kind of speaks to, you can't be nationalist. But again, where did we get the idea that you can't be nationalist? Who was like the most popular, I guess, or notorious rather, nationalist that most people can think of? When they point to Hitler and they say, well, because Hitler did it, it was bad. Now, obviously, it has a lot more nuance and there's deeper arguments to be had there, but that becomes the main theme that you see in a lot of this stuff.
Consciousness about the way the world is organized. Tucker Carlson, for example, if you listen to Tucker, a lot of people really like Tucker. Tucker is pretty critical of America. He's not doing a Howard Zinn critical America theory. Howard Zinn being the one who wrote the People's History, so the Marxist history of the United States, propaganda. He's writing a different critical history of the United States. Well, the Constitution was, not really adequate to prevent all of this. there is a post-World War II liberal consensus or world order that we're all being made subject to. Well, look at how America was involved in all of these things. America bad, America bad, America bad. Also, the UK was pretty bad too, and America bad, America bad. There's this kind of
I mean, that's objective. I mean, that is a literally objective fact. The American empire, as it's been involved in the endless foreign wars, as it's been involved, we had Dan McKnight on Jar Openers not too long ago. And he said, I think it was that we've been involved in 70 wars that most people don't even realize are going on. And he's a big advocate for for making or rather forcing Congress to declare war before we actually get involved in these situations. And you look at the Make Everybody American, that kind of idea is busted, and that kind of falls in line with globalist thinking, which is everybody should be like us. We should make everyone forget the cultures. And this speaks again to things from Christianity, which would be like the Babel agenda, right? The Tower of Babel. All the nations got together and chose that rather they should forego their own individual cultures, become alike in one another, speak all the same language, and we can progress and maybe one day, reach and touch God. The idea that they were going to build the tower up into the skies, into the heavens. And what does God do? He opposes that. God made the nations. God made people the way they are because we were supposed to be different. Anything kind of otherwise to that speaks that what God did was wrong, and we shouldn't have all these individual nations. We should all kind of have one culture. And again, there are deeper arguments to be had there, but these are the kind of the main ideas that are being given by James Lindsay, which is it's not a good position to oppose America from the perspective of Christianity. Now, you'll see a lot of this is because Tucker is also a recent Christian convert. Now, I don't know if you could go so far as to say he's like fully converted, but I think he's been involved enough and seen enough that he can go, I'm seeing evil at work. He pointed to the fact that Satan's been running the White House for the last however many years in a recent interview or article he wrote. I know as a response in a podcast, forgive me. And these ideas they hit harder to people who are at least have been to church or have read the Bible, and they take a look at what's going on in society, and they read Revelations, they read different portions of the Bible, they Sodom and Gomorrah, and they connect the dots and they go, yeah, we are being ruled by some kind of evil force, right? You look at like the way that transgender surgery on kids was pushed. You look at the way homosexuality has now developed into this kind of surrogacy of trafficking children as if that's a good thing, literally buying kids because they can't procreate themselves. There's so many kind of branches that break into this dystopic arena that kind of mocks what God created and points to the Babel agenda, which is, well, if we all agree it's good and we do it kindly, we can kind of force these abhorrent abominations through. And I think that's rather sad. But again, James Lindsay does a very poor job of articulating this idea to someone who disagrees with him. Constantine Conan is a liberal. I mean, this is a guy who was recently on the left as of like 2 years ago. And so again, you're not going to find James Lindsay in a format or on a platform where he's forced to kind of combat these ideas with someone who definitely disagrees with him. Now, I'm probably even doing it a disservice. They're definitely better than me who could kind of illustrate this, such as Orrin McIntyre or again Carl Benjamin, and even more kind of Christian nationalists who can actually poke a lot more holes into this than what I can too. Because again, I've become a lot less familiar with James Lindsay's work here in recent years because I've been so turned off, and I'm blocked by him on X. I can't remember what I said that maybe I disagreed with him one time, and he blocked me. But that happens to everybody, especially if you can tell that you are a Christian or someone who might be Christian nationalist adjacent. He wants nothing to do with you, and you are the woke right to him, because he views any kind of attempt at legitimizing power and using authority to do things as fascism, and it all kind of boils down to the liberalism is what we should have, nothing else.
Constant critical negativity. You see some of these characters, I mentioned Tucker Carlson, but you see some of these characters like Stephen Wolfe, who wrote the book The Case for Christian Nationalism, has put multiple times on social media, and I don't know what he said in public talks. I've only heard one of his public talks, but you see him on social media saying more than once that he has adopted critical theory specifically for his own purposes and to his own ends. He was recently saying on social media, somebody sent it to me, so I have to, I guess, confirm this, but he was saying that, in fact, the critical theory he uses is not the perverted version of critical theory that the left has used. It's its own more correct version of critique that goes back before the left, yada, yada. And so how do you not call the attempt to awaken a critical consciousness of the power structure that you believe has delegitimized your movement? How do you not call that woke, when woke means having awoken to a critical consciousness that there's a structural force that has delegitimized people in your political positionality? It's the exact same thing, unfortunately. It's just pushing a people in place kind of driven fascism, as opposed to a we're going to end all oppression by becoming the oppressor's communism.
It's very well explained, and that's kind of why I have been calling it, even though I'm not sure it is the best term, but the behavior is the same, right? It's quite obviously the same: victimhood, cancel culture, lying about history, all of this.
Rewriting history, lying about people, digging up people's past to cancel them. It's unbelievable.
If you remember, anybody, I imagine a lot of people may remember, the woke right term actually was born during Calendargate. And again, Calendargate, to summarize for maybe the 8,000th time, was when you had a lot of these liberal individuals, libertarians even, who have made their way onto the right by proxy, leaving the left, who made a calendar for a beer company that sexualized themselves to be sold to fathers in an attempt to raise and fundraise for different things. I believe one of them was like for Riley Gaines, supporting her against the transgender swimmer. Not to say that cause was bad, but to say that conservatives who were Christian conservatives obviously felt some type of way about that. They viewed it to being immodest. They viewed it, the ends, also to being immodest, right? Selling a kind of sexually explicit, not entirely, but at least sexually provocative materials to be hung in homes that have marriages. I mean, these kind of all these things that they were promoting among this group reeked of liberalism. It reeked of the kind of beginning of the social decay. And so again, like I said earlier, it speaks to like, they don't want it to be like, oh, OnlyFans and all this, but like they still want to be able to get naked and put themselves in pictures and kind of at least have the early tastes of feminism and what liberalism has brought America. And he does a really poor job here too. I would imagine if he was to actually engage with Stephen Wolfe, which I'm sure he hasn't blocked because you can't disagree with James Lindsay. He is somebody who views himself as being the smartest person in the room at all times. I'm sure Stephen Wolfe would have a lot to say and argue back against about that critical theory statement, right? Critical theory being, in view of the critical race theory, to give an idea in praxis, is with Ken, I always forget his name, Ibram Kennedy, who says, to undo racism, one must be actively racist or anti-racist. And anti-racist just means, using present discrimination to make up for past discrimination. I'm probably doing a poor job there explaining that too. But again, this is someone who obviously agrees. He sat there and was like, wow, very well explained. And it's just, we need to get James Lindsay in a public sphere arguing against somebody like an Orrin McIntyre or even Stephen Wolfe himself, Carl Benjamin. But again, he won't. He fears being made to look as if he were wrong because he believes wholeheartedly that he's right, and he'll take, nothing for an answer to that.
The one complaint that people have made about that I do think is valid is that they're not comparable in terms of influence and power. The woke left control, for a period of time, controlled what felt like everything. The woke right isn't anywhere near that level of influence at all. And frankly, I wonder whether, having talked about it as much as you and I have, we've maybe drawn too much attention to a very small fringe. Because when we went to the Trump rally, I didn't see it. I talked to a lot of people there. I listened to all the people on stage. I didn't hear in either the statements or the response to what people were saying, the type of conversation that you see online. So it seems to me like it's a tiny fringe that's being amplified by bot farms and foreign meddling and whatever.
And so obviously everything I'm saying, it just must be amplified, right? It must be botted. It must not be real. All the individuals I follow, all the orthodoxy guys, all of the people like Andrew Wilson, Jeff Younger, Sovereign Bra, Nick Fuentes too, like to act as if all these movements just like aren't real. I mean, we're in the fringes because, YouTube had the reins, like what they'd pointed to, all these institutions were controlled by the woke establishment. We weren't allowed to exist, is probably the better way to frame that. And so when you don't exist for a long enough period of time and then you come back, people are like, whoa, where have you been? Where are these ideas at? And it's like, yeah, because if I posted this on Facebook, dude, I'd be locked out of my account and I'd have to make a new one. And again, you know, they even highlight the fact that there's no power here, right? We have no actual claim in any institution, really. We don't have anything. These ideas have been bubbling up and building themselves. And you get these kind of, and you can even see how small the movement is, right? Imagine, you know, all of the kind of pro-life abolitionists, the ones who actually mean it and weren't money grabbers, like Ben Zaslav. Well, what happens when you try to push for being a federal abortion ban among the right? No, that ain't happening. There's no, you know, that's a politically dead movement. Like that's, you'll lose the election if you try to do that. Well, yeah, that's because there's actually like no power and it is a growing movement. And again, doing all of these things to a kind of obfuscate the actual true reality, which is Christian nationalism is growing. Once people begin to get familiar with what the ideas are being proposed, the structure set in place, also in comparison to what has existed previously, probably their entire lives, it's no surprise to me to see that it's growing. But I'll let this finish out. It's only like 30 seconds left.
But I think increasingly, I don't think of it as real, even though, as you say, there are one or two people who are very influential in American politics who have flirted with some of these ideas.
Yeah. That's a real thing.
And so I didn't watch this entire episode. I'm sure I could to kind of pick it apart even further. But you know, you can go online and on X specifically to kind of get a better idea of who's actually opposing it from different perspectives. And it's kind of it's all bad faith. Like that's the best way I can kind of frame it. Is it's entirely bad faith. It's done awfully from James Lindsay's perspective, the way he carries it out, and then it's also again adjacent by groups such as, you know, Konstantin Conan, who you see was pictured there, who was in that interview, you know, to where we are today, which is celebrating the fact that James Lindsay lied to a Christian publication, abused their trust, posted an article on a publication that no one literally has any idea who they are, by posting different switched out languages of the Communist Manifesto to like make some kind of stunt out of the fact that that we're the woke right, like Christian nationalism shares any kind of like realistic similarities with communism. You know, it's, and to me it's kind of laughable because the reason why we're talking about it today and we didn't talk about it 2 weeks ago when it actually happened was because literally nobody knows who this publication is. And so being like, you know, one of those serial killers who like wants people to know he did the crime, he like made sure he highlighted and quoted these tweets to point to the fact that it happened. Now, I imagine that article has since been archived or removed from the website, seeing how they got embarrassed the way they did. And again, you know, you might have wanted to wish that one of their copy editors or somebody there would have noticed some of the things being changed out, or maybe some kind of weirdness to it, or even, I guess, learning who James Lindsay is to not allow someone like that on your platform. If you had half an idea of who James Lindsay was, you know he's an enemy when it comes to the political side of things. He is no friend to Christianity, let alone any kind of source of Christian nationalism. And so I will end it there. The stream was rather unfortunately rocky. I apologize for anyone who stuck through it all the way, and I probably had bad portions of listening through. At least on my analytics, it was in the red. I did want to go to Pete Hegseth a bit, but I will have time, I think, either tomorrow or the day after, and I will actually just make a smaller stream just about the Pete Hegseth allegations. All in all, it just shows there's no power here. We're barely exist even on X, and now they're already trying to punch it down. It speaks more to them being threatened by what Christian nationalism is doing, and the reality that it is a growing political movement. It's growing very fast and rapidly, and they have no way to kind of battle it out or duke it out, and they're losing ground quickly. And again, I will point to the fact that Seth Dillon jumped in and was punching down on these people, and Joel Berry as well. And I'm forgetting some because I just have recency bias with who I saw earlier today talking about these things. But it hopefully it ends soon. And I have faith that Christian nationalism will begin to be further pushed forward. as well as also seeing some of these bad faith actors like James Lindsay and liberalism at least be forced to reckon with the fact that they are wrong, and have to argue their positions directly rather than indirectly and snipe people online. So again, hopefully the episode wasn't too bad and wasn't too laggy or choppy. Again, I would imagine the rewatch probably would be a lot better when it's fully uploaded and hopefully not have all those issues there. But I appreciate everybody who was here. Christ is King. Maybe I'll do a bit better of a job of illustrating exactly all the things that James Lindsay took positions on and give a more elaborate breakdown. But just to highlight the fact that they have been using tactics of subversion to gatekeep what is allowed in Christianity, when it's a lot of non-Christians, right? And Seth Dillon is some kind of dispensationalist. That guy would go and die for Israel before he ever died for any kind of American or Christian value here in this country. So with that being said, once again, I appreciate everybody for being here. Sorry I've not been able to go much longer. I've been short on time, but I've been trying to get back into the habit of doing this a lot more often. And so I hope everybody has a good day. Make sure you catch Jar Openers tomorrow with me and Whirl. We'll probably be discussing a bit of the Daily Wire stuff, but probably a lot more of purely traditional politics stuff. And hope to see you there. And follow the Discord. Jump in the Discord if you haven't already. Follow me on X too. Like the show, subscribe, all that jazz. It helps me out quite a lot. And I appreciate it very much. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.